Hello and welcome to Women's Football Hub. I am your host for this episode. I am Carolyn Kent, and today we are discussing long-term athletic development and its recent reframing towards long-term activity development. So with me today is a woman who's a seasoned strength and conditioning coach with a background in handball, rugby, and Olympic weightlifting. She's the founder of Arctic Therapy Health and Fitness and has over 20 years experience helping people build strength, resilience, and sustainable performance in sport and life. And she's also an expert colleague of mine. So welcome to Women's Football Hub, Maria Omma.
Thank you, Carolyn. I'm very happy to be here and looking forward to having this conversation.
I'm very looking forward to it. And thank you very much because you reached out to me about this. And this is something that I hadn't quite come across. I obviously knew about long-term athletic development. I'd researched in and around that. But let's start there.
Mhm.
Is long-term athletic development and how did we end up at long-term activity development?
Let's just keep it very light there. So long-term athletic development came about to get into the strength conditioning world. We were really screaming out for something because a lot of our research and how we were acting were for adults. And we were looking into how we actually build on from that and take that into children. Because the more we're learning that the science was growing, children are not small adults. They are very different in development and cognitively and all sorts of things. And obviously, they were already recognizing that. And we see that problem still, but they get to that age and they drop off and so forth. And obviously, as the professional sports and the money were growing, it really needed something. So when it was developed, it became developed by Stan Baldwin, and it was like you have the typical stages of having an active start, the fundamentals, learn to train, train to train, train to compete, train to win, and active for life. And you also have the one that we've done in strength and conditioning, and the long-term athlete development was very much isolated. It was like you take a step up and you move through these stages bit by bit, and that's it. You stop at that level, you stop, or you at the top, you're just done. And life isn't like that at all. One of the critiques they got was that it didn't really look at individuals and it oversimplified things. But maybe that's exactly where we wanted and needed to start. And if you look at most government documents and everything, they really pulled out the LTAD. And it just gave a branch to where we could then evolve. And I think a lot of sports and everything helped give them a direction to how to plan their sports and how kids were going through this and building their modules within that. So yeah, it's been super important for sports in general, not just for strength and conditioning, but we've learned a lot since then. And not long after the one in strength and conditioning came out, so I think it was in 2008, and then even 2011, 2012, we had youth physical development coming in, and that was with Rodri Lloyd. And then they complemented that long-term athlete development pathway to looking at the actual physical qualities. So maybe took a deep dive in what we're looking at as strength and conditioning coaches of how does girls and boys differs in their physical qualities throughout life as they're growing into adults. And they looked at strength, speed, agility, power, coordination, mobility, and endurance, and how you can almost where certain roles were important depending where they were. Like girls develop earlier than boys, so they would maximize throughout their peak growth spurt before and after and where that could fit in. And it was a fantastic complementary tool to at least our strength and conditioning because I obviously told us, yes, this is the average. Girls' growth spurt happens around 13, 14, boys happen around 15, 16, and how we can maximize potential throughout their physical qualities. That's that's a long time ago. We don't like to admit it, but that's a long time ago that came out. And it was, I think that kind of YPD, so the youth physical development module, really complemented and bridged that gap for us, at least in strength and conditioning. What I find and why I actually sent this journal to you, the long-term activity development, and it's been in the background for a lot of us. So at least maybe I just say personally for me, from my background, there was always something missing. Just looking at my own journey through sports and my journey as a coach. So it was very welcome. And obviously I've come across what you're doing in football, and I thought, this is right up your street. You need to read this. And so I had a little bit of a break because I went off becoming a mum. And so I don't know if I've just come back with a new interest of things, of how just obviously as my children are growing up. So I have a 7, a 5, and a soon to be 3-year-old, very active boys, all of them. And I had an opportunity came around about a year ago to really deep dive back into working with adolescents. And if I go back a little bit, why I opened up Arctic. So I was self-employed beforehand and I held contract with working with youth and adolescents. And then I obviously opened out Arctic. And it's always been about the whole person and looking at the obstacles sometimes that are put in place to either get back into fitness, or why are we doing fitness, or why we don't like fitness. Because there's a whole lot of things that tells us how we should train, what we should do, ought to do, and bad on you if you don't do them. And I don't agree with that.
Fair enough.
So a lot of the work that's pulled in is digging a little bit deeper to why are you showing up at my door? And if we keep it to women for now, would be like, it could have been one of those changes that I've had a baby, or have been ill. Could have been I've had an injury and I've lost confidence and I want to just get back into it. And throughout a lot of those conversations I've had over the years, it's been like, and I'm stereotyping, but also a very common thing. I would like to get back into a size.
Yeah. So they have a goal with regards to weight loss or weight journey, and
Yeah.
now what you're also seeing with the rise of GLP-1,
Yeah.
you're seeing these things come through. What's interesting, what you talked about, because obviously you sent me this paper by, I think, Fagenbaum, I think it was released in
Mhm.
2026, and it was released in the Journal of Strength and Conditioning. Now, what I liked about it was it's got those five phases. So it's got the
Mhm.
explore phase, the development phase, apply, sustain, and thrive. And actually, when I looked at it, I was reading it kind of going, this is reminding me of the WHO guidelines for activity. So it almost appears that they've taken that athletic development and brought in that sort of WHO public health sort of stuff and kind of combined the two. I am possibly completely wrong with that, but that was just my own personal take on it. So let's deep dive into those phases. So the explore phase, early engagement and play. So it's funny because you automatically, when you hear that word play, you assume that it's towards younger people. But actually, where I'm at the moment, Women's Football Hub, we're bringing women back into activity who have never had the chance to explore and play with football because they were banned from it for such a long time. So when we talk about exploration and movement for girls, and women, because I want to make sure that I do hit that, because there will be some of the people that come to our hubs listen to this. What does that look like in environments that you work in if we're saying to people, let's explore movement?
So, yeah. So that's what it's bringing it in. And that's what I really like about this, because it applies to both children and to adults. And that explore falls closely to my heart because we fall in love with movement. And it's, if you take the women that you're working with, they've been banned and not been able to access and come back into the community of sport. And or if someone I've been on a journey and haven't played for a couple of years, when they come back into this, we as adults, if we follow that old school long term athlete development, we just go right back at where we started, where we left off. And at the moment, there's a lot of sports days happening, from parent races, and including myself. I haven't done a fast maximum sprint since last year.
When's that
And
Soleus tear coming in?
yeah, exactly. We all line up and I have had 4 competitive athletes line up, and there was commentary from some of them were running. But we're asking for trouble because men, like Carly, we haven't changed, but we
Yeah.
have. And I think one of the most important stages here is explore. Because children does that naturally. That's how they learn. They explore, they climb. That looks a little bit scary, but I'm going to try anyway. Or it's like, we can dive into a whole other aspects here, but I'll try and keep the parent hat off. So having an environment and creating an environment such as what you're doing is about exploring those movements that your body might have never done. or haven't done for years. And that's why I like this. So they putting it as like a road, and this explore, develop, apply, and thrive. They're like little roundabouts.
Yeah.
Yeah. And they are, so you just jump up and go through the roundabout, getting slightly dizzy, enjoying the ride. And when you're ready to kind of go on the next one, you jump back onto the windy road and go through to development. So you can still see the elements of active start, the fundamentals, and then you go into develop, you're learning to train. They're still there. They're just worded really differently. And it takes out some of that performance element that sometimes is scary for people to apply back into. So for me, exploring, you know what? I think of goofiness, have fun.
Fun. Yeah.
And it's like, and that can look in, that might be that fun is football. Fun for me could be learning a new movement, but it can also be literally doing an obstacle race.
Let me come in there a little bit, right? So let's talk about kind of girls dropping out, and then I'll come on to older women in a second,
Yeah.
right? So girls often will drop out more than boys. We know this. This is well known in the literature.
Yeah.
So one of the big things that they will say is, I no longer enjoy it. So we talk about play, and you're talking about fun there. What do you think helps young players, this can be male or female, find enjoyment and confidence in those sort of early years?
The reason why they start, I think, I think when you, in those early years, when they're introduced to something, it's not structured. Like I do organized chaos,
Yeah.
but there's an element of free play and using your imagination. And you can see this is maybe some of the more early specialization sports that disappear and filter things out. And then you start getting the cream and the milk and stuff. But as you're going back to, that's the main reason why people get involved, or kids get involved in sports and they stay in the sports, because they're having fun and enjoying it. And it's that they can use their body, they're learning how to roll, they're learning how to throw, they're learning how to, but you're teaching them through games and
Mhm.
activities. One of my favorite warm up games when I'm working with children, if I have the space, TIG.
Yeah.
It does not look fancy, but do they move? And they forget that they're doing physical activity. It's like someone say to me, I hate the gym, I hate physical activity, but put a ball in front of me, I'll run.
That is how I was as an athlete. Do not ask me to go and run a 10K, but if you put me on a pitch and let me chase something around, not a problem.
Yeah. So I think as long as you're maintaining that passion, that love is more likely to keep you in the sport. But when we start putting those parameters in, perhaps what they're arguing that the long-term athlete development module did, we start really making that box really narrow, and we're restricting thinking. They're just
Yeah.
doing.
And you know what? I don't think that fun stops. And the reason I'll give a shout out to Lindsay Payton Donaldson here, who takes our sort of older adults coming back into football or trying football for the first time. All of those games you would use with young
Mm.
children, we use with the older women, and they love it.
I love it.
They love it. And you know what? And we're very careful not to infantilize them, but we use all of that, and we literally just take those games and let them play, and they love
Mhm.
it. And what's interesting, sometimes we find that when they go into other areas and it becomes more structured and almost more, we have to do this drill and get that right and make sure your performance is this high, they start not enjoying it. And I think there's a real conversation to be had there with regards to, and again, that that word fun has been massive for me. Now, let's move on slightly to the development phase. So this is where they're getting to the point where they're starting to build some skills and also build some strength. What fundamental skills do you feel matter for long-term engagement? Let's keep it towards women's football, but and this is beyond the technical side. So as a strength and conditioning coach, if you're talking developing skills and strength, what would you advise for football in general?
A question I always start with when it's like, as a football player, how many times are you on one leg?
Yeah.
And they will go, when I'm shooting a goal, well, kicking. And that's normally where it stops. Every time you run, you're on one leg.
Yeah.
And so actually having the movement patterns and change the direction. So yeah, you have running, multiple planes, jumping through, like throwing, you're not going to have hand-eye coordination. You're going to have to, if you're doing a header and everything, balancing, like all the fundamental skill sets that sits under the big umbrella for me. So you have physical literacy and then you have the fundamentals. I think whatever sport it is, working at a broader scheme just to fall in love in any movement, not just the sport itself. And that's what I'm hearing you're doing with the women coming and playing. They're having fun and they're actually working through TIG, change of direction, reading opponents, and actually, yeah, being on one leg, turning their torso. So for many reasons, as a strength and conditioning coach, it's not that the programming necessarily differs. But what I'm seeing is that we jump into fancy. We're competing against TikTok, Instagram, like all these fancy way to explore and actually train our body to get stronger, to have balance, coordination, and all these things. But it's when we can keep it rather simple and get like, how do we do power production? Yeah, a good old squat comes a long way. Get the strength, then get the power. And I call it, we have this ladder that we can work our way through and then eventually put them together and get this big massive tree. But we can take 2 steps. They will come back and haunt us. And that's when we'll have the risk of injuries, strong quads versus strong hamstrings. But through that development stage, it's about building the skills. So it's the movement competence and confidence that comes with that. And I think I can complement that in the gym and building both confidence, not just within the lift that we're doing and the exercise we're executing, but also within the individual. And that can be complemented on the pitch and then starts bridging the gap between putting these skill sets together. So if we can work on becoming stronger in the gym, then can we apply them through more fun drills, such as TIG, to implement the next step of skill development?
So I think about a few things there, right? TIG, you can pretty much do in any environment. Doesn't matter whether you're indoors, outdoors, it's available to you as a coach, right? But then you said, hey, we need to get in the gym, right? But there are, and this is something I've always contemplated in football, there are big barriers towards that.
Yeah.
Cost is obviously a massive one, and sometimes with regards to football, socioeconomics is a real problem. There may not be a gym that's available. It may be very expensive, blah, blah, blah. But what you've just said there about single leg training, that can literally be done with body weight and manipulating tempo, right? And you can use multiple things as a weight. So I'm interested in how and obviously I know that in the background where you're sitting at the moment, you've got a lovely gym. You have a lovely, very well equipped gym. But what would you recommend to people that are maybe they don't have that facility available to them? How would you get people to really work on that developing phase where they're building strength, but they maybe don't have equipment? What would you be advice to them be there?
See, if in those, I would actually put almost the explore and development phase together and explore through, can you work in groups or partner and doing it while you're warming up? Do those. Can you play TIG, holding, linking onto someone and then jumping on one leg, and every 10 jump, you swap over to the other one. All of a sudden, you're moving sideways and everything. You're not really, again, thinking about that, but we can go down using scientific language, but it's, yeah, sometimes for some that kills the joy. But you can use resistance bands, or you can just use body weight. It comes to an element that you don't actually have to go to the gym. I say go to the gym because that's where I work, but using and challenging, and it could literally be, that's when you start, okay, I'm enjoying playing football. I need to maybe work my core a little bit. Open water swimming. There's good social groups there, hill walking groups, or just going and walking on your own. You build a lot of strength just through movement. And I think that's what this new model of long-term activity development encourages is to go. And that's why I say I fall in love with movement. Doesn't really matter what movement is, as long as there's an element of enjoyment.
So and yeah, exploring new things as well is what you're saying there. And yeah, it's interesting because I remember I've seen some coaches do some great things with arrow races and kind of last one on their partner's back. And I'm not
with someone on your back, and then
yeah,
one of my favorites, funking and crawling around.
yeah. One of my friends did that once at a party and didn't get her hands out quick enough as she fell forward. So I'm always very careful to say, please include health and safety in your risk assessment before you decide to put those into
Yeah,
your.
I'm starting to see, and it's coming through physical literacy, and it is this new national PE modules that's coming out about this, and actually what does it actually mean to good physical literacy? And I think maybe that's like what I'm talking about, the ladder, the physical ABCs.
Yeah.
Let's just actually look at them, and it's not as narrow as sometimes we have in our head as adults. It's actually much broader, and maybe instead of like when we talk about I'm going to the gym to do a session, when I'm going to move. I'm going to do a movement session.
Yeah.
Could that take some of the stigma away where you don't have to go to a gym. I'm just going to go hill walking. I'm just going to go open water swimming. I'm going to try horseback riding, which is excellent.
Yeah. Yeah. For core,
And
it's unbelievable.
oh, exactly. See if you get the hip extension to control the horse if you're going fast.
And those groins get a really good workout.
So I think what we're seeing coming out is like, how can, and it's something I learned as well, instead of thinking, what can we not do or something and be really rigid as strength and conditioning coaches, what can we do? And how can we be creative about this? I think being creative and have more, almost keep seeing something that's coming up for me is the world has lost its colors.
Yeah.
And that is like,
Yeah.
we've lost our creativity. Our strategist in it is so to be more efficient all the time. And I think we killed part of the enjoyment in general. So by giving a little bit of color to it. So it's, yeah, during warm-ups, most football clubs have a couple of hurdles, or we got lines, jump over the lines. Can we go back to maybe risk assessment and everything? Can we dive through something? Could we bring in some gymnastic skills? And that is something maybe that might be a bigger question. So coaches and coaches developing the pathway. Can we actually, would sports be interested in, let's think outside the box here? No.
Yeah, and recently I was working with elite level, and one of the things that they did in the warm up, which I absolutely loved, the mannequins they use for free kicks.
Yeah.
Well, the task was to dress your mannequin as quickly as possible, and honestly, these are elite level footballers, and they have like and again, there's you're working on your warm up, you're working on a little bit of power, but there's also hand-eye coordination as you pass different items to each other. And of course, we should always obviously have some sort of competition to ensure that we do grade how you've dressed your mannequin, because that is always important. Optics are always important. So, and again, there it comes back to fun and
Mhm.
and enjoyment, because sometimes I agree we can kill that, and I say that in physiotherapy sessions too. I can't tell you how many times patients have intimated that that was boring. And sometimes, listen, there is times where, yeah, I'm afraid it has to
Oh
be.
no, definitely. It
There
has to be
has to
more.
be. We have to be specific. We have to make sure that we just go through
Yeah.
this, but we have to do it at an intensity that you're going to see a kind of increase in development.
Mhm.
However, there are times where we do have to think, look, if this is a long-term rehabilitation or it's a long-term strengthening block, have we lost the fun element? Can we bring that a bit? So
Yeah.
let's move on to applying. Okay, so this is where you're using those abilities, and we'll keep it towards football context.
Mhm.
What does it look like when somebody successfully applies the physical skills that they've learned in those first two phases?
The practical skills, obviously, it is when we apply them in a meaningful context. And I think if we go through those different levels, recreational, grassroots, and so like it's what you are trying to achieve, whether without be sidestepping someone, going into a tackle, those skills, like, am I more balanced? You don't have to necessarily think, then break this down. I'm bracing my core going into a tackle here. I can jump a little bit higher to get that ball and win that header. And that is like using and applying those skills in a meaningful matter to you or meaningful context. And it's like, when we go down that path, instead of saying like we can start measuring this and everything. But what is success for you in that element of time? Is that to score a goal at the World Cup, which puts more pressure, I can only imagine. But is that, what have you been working on? And I think we need to recognize, what have I gone through? What have I explored? What have I through the explorative phase? What did I enjoy? What was fun? What have I been trying to develop? And then all of a sudden it just feels right.
Yeah.
If I can use an example that I use in weightlifting when I'm coach weightlifting, and I always say to them, see those reps that felt good, let's focus on them. And we only reflect what you did when you when those felt good. You see it in the movement because it's smooth, it's effortless. And I like planting that foot and really hitting that ball off your foot and really getting that drive straight in. The beautiful goals.
Mm.
That is a very meaningful use of ability in that setting, isn't it? So I think it's like taking that, what is success in your setting and what is meaningful in that moment of time. And when you're taking those skills, whatever they might be, to execute that, and it could be that I, you get a good lift or you get a good kick, but next 5 is, oh, and you keep, and that kind of naturally takes us into those consistent habits. I find like using and applying those skills is like they're not consistently, they're not happening without thinking it, but we're starting to recognize, oh, that felt good. How did I do that? And then you start doing it again and trying to, you get into this whole thing about getting into really training to compete and getting consistent if we're going to cross the modules. And that takes us into those consistent habits that are just, I know how to do this in my sleep.
You know, it's interesting that you bring that up because obviously when we're dealing and obviously you see development through skill-based movements with children. You'll see them be able to pull themselves up. They'll be able to sit independently. They're able to go from crawling to standing to walking. But actually, what we're dealing with at Women's Football Hub, we're dealing with older women
Mm.
coming back to sport or sometimes entering it for the first time in their 40s, 50s, and 60s. Now, I asked them to do a lunge. They are shocked at how little range of motion they actually have. Fast forward a few weeks of just doing a warm up that maybe consists of a lunge. The difference is unbelievable. And then, of course, you have other things. For example, you'll watch them score their first goal that doesn't use the toe because they've actually learned to be able to externally rotate their foot and hit through the ball or hit the ball with the laces for the first time. So we see that skill development coming on. But from a physical perspective, one of the biggest things I notice is they're more robust
Hmm.
because when they first come into football, and especially if there is, we try to minimize contact, but if there is contact, they can't fall. They literally don't know how to fall, which I find, if you think about it as a child, when you were going through gymnastics, your forward rolls, your backward rolls, your all of that is then missing from the adult learner coming back within football. But what's interesting is how quickly it actually comes back just by working on it.
Yeah.
That's the interesting thing.
And I think that's goes back to that windy road and those roundabouts, that whatever, if, because life happens as we grow older and we move less and we got sedentary desks and coming back from having 3 children, and we can just go backwards in that windy road, revisit. It's a light to revisit those other roundabouts, like exploring development. It's uncomfortable because maybe we could do this or we never have done it. We like being good at what we do, but then using those and what is success. And as you see those development stages coming through, and you see the research saying of being able to get off the floor without using your hands is actually a direct correlation to longevity.
Yeah.
And exactly what you're saying, using those lunges or by doing it, you do get better. And all of a sudden you have building those consistent habits that can apply to other elements in your life. And that kind of, if we just move that slightly further from having those, getting those habits, and all of a sudden we're not completely crouching our back to pick something off the floor, we're actually squatting down or lunging to get something. Don't put our lower back at the risk, for example, and other niggles that comes with age. That gets us into that next almost thriving. I don't think at any age that stops. We just stop, we do less of it, where we put ourselves in a new, strange, and uncomfortable situation where there's opportunity for growth and learning. And that gets us into when we achieve something, we thrive. And that's the word, the language they've used.
Yeah.
And and then they call it also, they call it the true potential. Because the potential where you're at is your potential, is that individualization rather than grouping and put you against the whole world or your age group. What does that mean to you? The women's hub is, I get to go and play a sport that I love, but I haven't done in a long time. I get community.
And I think you spoke obviously about the last phase there, the thrive phase, but the phase before that, the sustain phase, and about coming back into sport. And there's
Mhm.
so many life changes that happen. And I'm not saying they don't happen with male athletes, but I'm going to focus on female athletes. But puberty, exams, university, pregnancy, work, all of those things, elderly parents, all of those things can disrupt your ability to sustain activity and exercise. The model is effectively saying is that, yeah, you might kind of have to try and sustain, but you might have to drop back
Yeah.
on the model as well, because they do look at it like a sort of road and pathway. And I think for me, and obviously you've come back from 3 pregnancies now, how easy is it for you running a business, 3 children, to maintain your own or sustain your own movement literacy?
So yeah, I realized that I called it consistent habits, but yeah, it's the sustainability. Yeah, you're right. And it's to answer that, I have a really good partner. It's teamwork. It's
It's a team
teamwork.
game.
It's a team game, and it's not easy all the time. And it's sometimes things gonna give, and we can argue that the balance doesn't sit comfortably or is non-existent. But as long as the communication, and I'm lucky that I can say to my like they know I'm the one that leaves to go out the door. And sometimes look at yesterday, I was out the door at 20 to 6. They haven't woken up yet. And I was away, like I'm away, I was away till 7 p.m. But they know mommy goes to work to help people or to make people stronger. And when I'm with them, I'm with them. And it's just when, but another element I've definitely learned is mum guilt or parent guilt.
Yeah. Yeah.
When we are deep dive into something. But it's a never, I don't think we ever hit. And I think that maybe that represent what we're just seeing here, what they're coming out with is we got to allow the flow, and what works for someone doesn't work for someone else. And it's allowing ourselves that we can go back to this. We can go back, and I'm constantly going back to, yeah, okay, I got 8 weeks of really good training. Kids are sick. That's a week written off. Then it's
Yeah.
catching up on work. And all of a sudden I'm 2 weeks out. I'm having to go back all the time. And at times that feels like absolutely madness. But it's, I think we are talking about it more, I think, and more openly. And there's so much more research coming out for women, even in not going like in physical activity, strength work, and creatine, for example. Like we can go, there's so much more coming out of actual research, what I think is important. But I always still do believe that if that whole thing is like about movement and fall in love with it, whatever that might be, it doesn't have to be X, Y, and Z, which what we ought to do, should do. There's other ways to achieve things.
Final question. If this model was widely adopted in women's football or girls' football, what impact do you think it would have on, for example, participation?
I think it was widely implemented and highlighted, right? The coaches coming through and taking these sessions and looking into also where and recognizing the person. It can have a massive impact, definitely. And you always have to look at who's in front of you, who you're working with, and and I think that's part of the art and the magic of coaching and working with people. Someone needs an arm around you, another needs a push, but knowing that person, actually investing it. Because I have had athletes who's had coaches for 3 years, they relatively new, and they didn't even know they had a dog. It's very basic. It's human connection and communication. And I think this allows to open up those doors to those conversations, that there's more. And I need to go back a little bit. I've been in the sustained phase and I'm thriving, but actually an injury has set me back. So I need to explore again. And that's okay.
Yeah.
And why that, and how does that look? And when we're exploring, we have to, go through the maybe a little bit rigid phase through rehabilitation.
Yep.
But then let's revisit. And sometimes it's nice to revisit why it was fun in the first place.
And why are you, especially when I think about that with regards to injury, why are you striving to get back to it?
Yeah.
So Maria, it's been a lovely conversation. I know you're a very busy woman, so I'm going to let you head off and go on with your day. To those of you who are working with athletes, please remember that just getting them to be active is actually part of their development. And please try and keep it fun, because trust me, you'll see such a big difference in your sessions. If you are there working with athletes, please always follow the evidence. We will see you soon.
Thank you for listening to Women's Football Hub. The information within this podcast is for informational purposes only. No material on this podcast is intended to be a substitute for medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Please contact your doctor or another healthcare professional if you have any questions about anything raised in this podcast.